All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is so nice to see so many of my friends and colleagues, family members in this audience. This truly is a special space. And so I want to welcome you to this event this evening. We are going to have greetings from the provost of Georgia State University. Oh, I guess I should introduce myself. I, I am Tanya Washington. I'm a professor at Georgia State College of Law. Next month will be my 22nd year at the university. Yes, I started at 13. And it's just wonderful. We've got co-sponsors who I will acknowledge in a moment. But first, I am going to introduce our provost, the provost of the university, Georgia State University, who will bring greetings. And I just want to thank her in advance for being here, because it's this kind of scholarship, work, and research that makes Georgia State what it is.
Good evening, everyone. I love it when the room kind of fills in. You're not quite sure how many people are here, and then you look out and you see all these wonderful faces. Thank you so much for being here. And it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome you to this historic event as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown versus Board of Education. This pivotal ruling not only declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional, but it also forever altered the course of education and civil rights in our country. Tonight's event has been made possible by many people, but in addition to a $2.1 million grant supporting the trailblazing work of Professors Tanya Washington, Cathy Smith, and Robin Walker Shearling. If we could give them a round of applause, please. Their efforts to advance children's constitutional rights across a variety of contexts embody the spirit of innovation and justice. It is precisely the caliber of groundbreaking research and advocacy that has earned Georgia State University a national recognition. For the third consecutive year, the U.S. News and World Report has ranked GSU as the #2 most innovative public university in the nation. It's this kind of recognition that speaks to our commitment to solving the complex problems and challenges of the 21st century. We are immensely proud of the work of the advancement of the Children's Constitutional Rights Consortium. We are grateful for the opportunity to spotlight their work in this celebration of Brown versus the Board of Education and the courageous children who helped to enforce its mandate right here in Georgia. Those at the university know that I had somewhere else that I could have been this evening, and I made a conscious decision to be here instead of there, because while I have a flight to catch tomorrow because I need to be with my mother who's going to have some minor surgery, I knew that being here tonight with you all was something that I would not want to miss. Because as I think about my mother, I think about how Brown versus the Board of Education touches my family. So on a personal note, as I reflect about its relevance in history, for those who suggest that the past is simply the past, I stand before you to say that the past is alive and present right here in this room. My family story, as many of yours also, is a testament to that truth. Like many Black Americans whose families and their histories trace back to the early 1600s, my family's roots are in North Carolina. Over time, my family migrated to Virginia, where many of them still reside. My parents moved with me to Chicago when I was just 4 years old. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually understood the harrowing experiences of my mother's family, who lived in Prince Edward County, Virginia. In 1959, rather than integrate the schools, the county chose to close them entirely. Some of the children, including members of my own family, had to move to Richmond, the city, to live with other relatives to attend school there. And others were not so fortunate. The schools remained closed for 5 years, critical span of time in children's educational lives. And for many who could not escape to the city to go to be near someone, it changed their lives forever. And the impacts last today. The pain of what some call a distant path is not distant. When I see my cousins and the family reunions, and I hear their stories, and I hear how it impacts them even today, how they move in the world, how they communicate, how they see the future of the world. These experiences remind us that the work of ensuring that equity and justice in education remains as critical today as it was 7 decades ago. I'm deeply grateful for the esteemed panelists that are joining us tonight, for your courage and for your insight and your steadfast commitment to civil rights as you continue to inspire all of us. I also want to express my heartfelt thanks to our moderator, award-winning journalist, Rose Scott. Because I know her thoughtful approach will undoubtedly guide us through an engaging and an inspiring conversation. Finally, I'd like to thank each of you for being in the audience tonight. In the words of Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here tonight. Your presence here is a testament to your collective commitment to reflection, to learning, and to progress. Together, as we honor the legacy of Brown versus Board of Education, and we recommit ourselves to the ongoing pursuit of justice and equality, I want to say thank you, and I look forward to the meaningful and enlightful evening. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Courtney Anderson, and I'm the interim dean at Georgia State University College of Law. I wish I could be there with you all in person to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. Professor Tanya Washington invited the College of Law to co-sponsor this momentous celebration that has been made possible by Rights4Children, and it is our distinct pleasure to do so. The intention of academics, practitioners, and thought leaders who are dedicated to the advancement and protection of civil and human rights to dedicate time to delve into how this landmark decision has impacted our social, political, judicial, and economic landscape is truly inspiring. Brown v. Board explicitly states that education is a vital function of state and local governments, and Georgia State University has wholeheartedly embraced this edict. As our institution continues to innovate in areas of academic excellence, we will do so with a spirit of equality and inclusion. Thank you all so much for your presence and participation, and enjoy this convening.
I would like to now ask the Honorable Nancy Abudu from the 11th Circuit, who, I have to say this, Nancy, she is the first Black woman to sit on that bench at such a time as this.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for that heartfelt reception. You know, even with us having done this kind of work and speaking for so many years, you still get a little nervous in front of the crowd. But even when I was sitting there and just feeling all of the love and the commitment, it feels really good to be in this space. So I want to first thank Professor Washington for inviting me, and to her and her whole team for putting this event together and for including me, because I realize that we are celebrating the seminal case of Brown v. Board of Education at a time that even as a judge, I do think it is appropriate to say that we are in a crisis. And I recognize that with my role being on the bench, I also inherit a lot of history. And unfortunately, some of that history is not very pleasant. And Brown does demonstrate the history of our country, which is that before Brown and after Brown, there have been courts and therefore judges who have unfortunately used the law in a way that doesn't necessarily match the needs of the people over whom we're presiding, and unfortunately has oftentimes perpetuated the degradation and inhumanity that many people continue to experience. But Brown also reminds us that the courts can sometimes surprise us. I was listening to an oral interview of Jack Greenberg, who was one of the leaders of LDS litigation program, and he shared that he and Justice Marshall actually weren't sure, not necessarily that they would win, but that they would get the unanimous vote that they got, especially because there were justices on the Supreme Court who had privately expressed that they were not necessarily in favor of integration. And yet these justices did rule in favor of the plaintiffs in Brown because at the end of the day, they recognized that the rule of law and the importance of maintaining the Equal Protection Clause as it is supposed to apply to all people was more important than advancing their personal feelings, which didn't match with the needs of the people. And that, even in that mixed, convoluted, nuanced history, is still encouraging to me as I am on the bench. So I am here today, of course, to celebrate and support my sister as she continues to advance this work, and all of you who are in the trenches in this area of the law and of our social work. But I'm also here to listen because I have a lot of questions. Of course, I have to respect as a beneficiary of the Brown v. Board of Education decision that I have had an opportunity to be in educational or academic environments that have led to me being on the bench. But I am curious as to what Brown is going to look like moving forward, especially when we get to Brown at 100. We know that technology has completely changed the landscape of how we interact and deal with each other. Brown was decided at a time when the classroom was the primary vehicle for educating people, and the pandemic brought to the masses that dynamic has changed. Google is free, Wikipedia is free, but the computer is not free. And the Wi-Fi to access Google and Wikipedia are not free. So what does racial discrimination when it comes to education look like today when those are the facts that are brought in front of a case? I'm curious, what does equal mean in the Equal Protection Clause when we have de facto discrimination with the existence of the Equal Protection Clause? So I'm here today, as I said, to really hear from the panelists. I've gotten an opportunity to meet some of them already. And I also just want to echo my appreciation that on this Wednesday evening, when we all have so many other places that we could be, that we intentionally decided to be here today because this battle is not over. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So before I turn things over to our moderator, there's some folks in the room that I really want to recognize. So I am going to ask some of you to stand. My co-founders for Rights4Children, which is hosting this convening, Professor Smith and Professor Robin Walker Sterling. Would you please stand? We are we are a Black woman law professor-led think tank that engages in research and advocacy, advancing children's rights in a number of contexts. And we were charged with 4 convenings in highlighting different areas that match with children's lived experiences. Education is the first convening, and this public-facing event is part of that convening. Tomorrow and Friday, we will be hosting 15 thought leaders from across the United States, educators, policy workers, Board of Education members, academics, who are going to study the education chapter of Project 2025. Now, I know some people have avoided reading this document, but rarely do you get the playbook, right? So why would we not read it? Why would we not read it, assess it? There's got to be some opportunity in there. You can't foreclose all justice. It's just impossible. It's like water. It will find a way and cut a path through a mountain. So we're going to study this. That's what we're going to spend the next 2 days doing. I would like to ask my 15 thought leaders who are here with us to stand so everybody can see who you are. Yes. And we will be sure to publish and share what we come up with, because it can provide an understanding of what we are facing and a way to develop strategic responses. I also want to recognize the folks who helped put this together, the hands and feet on the ground, our Chief of Staff, Chai, Mathis. She is amazing. She's amazing. I want to thank the staff. I want to thank the photographers and the videographers. I want to thank the sound engineers and the producers, because without them, this isn't possible, and it just doesn't flow the way it needs to, so that we can really highlight the stories that we are going to hear about. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank our moderator, Rose Scott, and I want to thank our panelists for being willing to share stories that I'm sure are not pleasant, but nevertheless can inspire us in the moments that we are facing. I also want to recognize and ask to come to the stage Dr. Yvette Stevens Crossing. She is, I don't know if you all had an opportunity to see the beautiful exhibit, there it is on the screen, the beautiful painting artwork that she has put together that really, I think, captures the sentiment of this case and what it means to our community, to the African American community. And I want to ask her to just say a few words.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to share the artwork. I'm a physician. I work full-time. I'm an internist. And during the pandemic, I was gifted the ability to do art. I chronicled the pandemic for about 9 months. That got rather depressing. So I did some religious pieces, and then I started doing narrative, historical, African-American pieces. And so I have about 100 of them. Because I did that to decompress during the pandemic. And actually, Brown versus the Board of Education was one of the earlier pieces that I did. My goal is to have so much information in one picture, one narrative picture, that if people learn visually, then it will resonate with them, it will evoke an emotion, and then hopefully they'll be able to remember the details. If they can't remember the words, they can remember the pictures, okay? So they had asked me to give some background on the piece. It's a mixed media piece, and the original is out in the foyer there. And it is, the center of it represents Thurgood Marshall and Reverend Brown and Linda Brown, but it represents the number of families that were represented in the case. It wasn't just Brown versus the Board of Education. There were several states in the Washington, D.C. that were represented. And so they are representing the various factions. And to the right there is the Sumner School. And that was the school that was closest to the Brown family. And that's the school that the father had wanted her to be admitted to. But she never went to the school, because by the time the ruling was passed, she was actually in junior high school or middle school. So she actually went to a different school. The gold piece above the three of them is the breaking of the glass ceiling, because this occurred in 1954, and then the civil rights movement was in full swing in 55 and beyond. So it was felt to be a start of the civil rights movement. And so the breaking of the glass ceiling was the opportunity for people to have equal voting and equal housing, and for Thurgood Marshall actually to ascend to be a justice in the Supreme Court. The classrooms are represented. The Black classroom that was overcrowded and had used books and torn pages is represented on the left-hand side. The classrooms in the white sections are represented on the right, where there was a better teacher to student ratio, newer books, and the scales were tipped toward the white classroom. But I represented the two students as looking almost exactly the same. The only difference is the color of their skin. They have the same clothes on, they're sitting in the same way, and essentially would have the same opportunities in the future. The picture next to the Supreme Court is actually a picture of desegregation, which my griot friend Cathy pointed out is different than integration. And so it's represented as a mosaic as opposed to a blending. And then the eagle there is the arc of the moral universe being long but bending toward justice. And I was so proud. I called my friend Cathy and I said, I finished the work. And she said, well, where's Plessy versus Ferguson? you can't have Brown versus the Board of Education without Plessy versus Ferguson. And she said it just like that. And she's sitting right over there. She knows she did. So I called a cousin of mine and I said, what do you think of when you think of Brown versus the Board of Education? And he said, I think of a lightning bolt. So I put the lightning bolt in Thurgood Marshall's hand, and he's disrupting the track of the trains, representing the disruption of the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. I called one of my historians the other day, and it's Dr. Miles Mark Fisher IV. He told me not to give him credit, but I have to give him credit. And he told me that he was actually in college at Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia, when the decision was passed, and that the president of the university ran out and said, we did it. And actually, one of Dr. Fisher's cousins was actually working with Thurgood Marshall with the decision. And he said that it was just a great day. But he says, as you all have heard before, that it's easier to pass the law. It's harder to change the heart of a person. And so that is what we're dealing with now. He said with recent decisions with the Supreme Court, with affirmative action decisions and things like that, that all of this ties into the Brown decision, and that it needs to be kept in the forefront. And we need to keep fighting for justice and equality.
Rose, are you ready?
I am Rose Scott from WABE, your friendly NPR station here in Atlanta. Thank you all for being here. Yes, I know you all wish to come to Before we play a clip, it's like school, this is education. I'm going to ask that you partake in an exercise. But first, I just want to say that whenever y'all call it Professor Washington, I call it Tanya. Whenever Tanya calls me, and Tanya will call me at 6 in the morning. Whenever Professor Washington calls, I'm going to be there. She was probably one of the smartest people I know on the planet. She's been a guest on our program many times, and she brings not only truth and accuracy, which is missing in some news outlets, but she brings it with clarity. So I am very grateful for that. Also, I just want to acknowledge that while we are here today, this is the perfect place and the perfect time to acknowledge our sister, who's now an ancestor, Giovanni. So before we play this next clip, I'm going to ask everybody, I want everybody to really do this. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Do not open, okay? Take a listen to this.
My name is Thomas J. Wesley, Jr. I'm a real estate man. I've lived in Atlanta all my life. The organization has over 5,000 members in Fulton County.
Now, what's the name of the organization?
The name of the organization is the Metropolitan Association to Continue Segregated Education.
Is that the sole purpose of the organization?
That's the sole purpose of the organization. Some of the people are saying, save our schools. We say, save our children first. The reasons for separation of the races are very important in the South. We want the Negroes to have full opportunity for self-advancement, but see no reason why this necessarily entails their forced inclusion into places where they are not suited.
Our nation had the May 17, 1954 Supreme Court decision translated into 42 languages and sent it around the world. The United States wanted the struggling darker peoples to realize our sense of justice. As we publish our good things, Russia propagandizes our mistakes. Number two, we need more and better education for all. Democracy requires a higher level of intelligence than any other form of government, as the power is with the body politic. Less than 100 Negro students would be involved in Atlanta, thereabout. Where they live will determine where they attend school. We have the brains, the character, the goodwill, the religion, and the democratic desire to solve to the advantage of all the problem which is before us. We must give every child more and better education.
I'm representing about 120 parents, teachers, and students.
Did you have a poll?
We did not have a poll, but being a Christian school, we take the position of the Bible on all matters.
Which position do you take on this matter?
The position is number one.
Number one.
And I have a brief statement. That we believe that segregation is scriptural, reading directly from the Bible.
Give us a reference, if you don't mind.
Acts 17:26.
I'll go ahead.
That God determined the bounds of the habitations.
Go ahead.
We believe that segregation is constitutional, that Congress, the only body empowered by the Constitution to make laws, has not passed a desegregation law.
All right.
We feel that segregation is educationally sound, that it meets both races on their own level in homogeneous groups and best serves the purposes of both races. And we feel that integration is subversive in that it divides the people. It leads toward the communist goal of amalgamation of the races. It promotes centralization of power and uses the Negro to set up a police state with the federal government policing the situation.
Thank you very much.
I wish to say that the Negroes are our own people. They are 8th and 10th generation Southerners, fellow human beings and fellow Americans. They manifest the traditional Southern virtues of honor in dealing with an adversary, courage in adversity, and they are now practicing the traditional American virtue of taking responsibility for oneself by seeking to secure their rights as human beings. We, a small section of the world, cannot halt mankind's progress without the inevitable consequence of decline spiritually and materially. I am in favor of free, non-segregated schools for all our children, black and white, who are born equal in every respect except in the lack of opportunity that we whites, to our shame, inflict upon them, the colored ones.
Think about your first day of school when you were maybe 6 or 7. Just think about that first day of school. You're all dressed up, and if you're like my mom, then you have some patent leather shoes, and you're told, don't you dare stuff these up. So you're all fancy, go into the classroom. Nobody looks like you, not even the teacher. Or maybe only a few that look like you. Now open your eyes. These are those students, right here. Tonight, our conversation is a history lesson, as far as I'm concerned. And to go back to our dear sister Nikki Giovanni, who says, I'm glad I understand that while language is a gift, listening is a responsibility. And so tonight, as we have reflection and absorption and acknowledgement and dedication, we do this for the children. Now, they're a little older than the children, but they're still children. But their stories are important, and their lived experiences are important. And so tonight, we will hear some more stories. We don't have time for a little Q&A with another wonderful journalist, Ty. So if you want to cry, it's okay. If you want to say hallelujah, it's okay. You might need class in your collection plate, I don't know. But this is that moment to share those stories. I'm going to begin with Reverend Mathis. Reverend, in that clip, the lady said that segregation is scripture.
Well, down through the years since the beginning of the European exploration, we've seen how individuals have taken religion and made it what they want it to be. We've seen how down through that whole diaspora period, how white men said that they had been ordained by God to rule over us through manifest destiny. There's also some who would take the Bible and say that Noah's sons, of course, he had these boys, and some of the boys, turned and when he was drunk and backed in the covenant, but they said that other boy, that's why we got cursed, and that's why we are who we are. So I think it's ludicrous when we see people trying to take scripture and perpetuate a kind of lifestyle, if you will, that will benefit them and put others down. There's nowhere in scripture that puts one race over another. That's why we're in the midst of Christmas. He came to break those barriers. He came to break those barriers down. He came so that the Jew and the Gentile could walk hand in hand. But now, of course, you got these, I just recently saw this last election where the evangelicals went down a path that was contrary to the preaching and the teachings of the Bible. They went with a man who had violated every principle, basically, in the Bible. And you had some of the biggest preachers in the country standing with him, flanked by his right and his left side. But there is no way that we can buy into God being such an unjust God that he will give one race superiority over another race.
Yeah. Ms. Phyllis Jackson Smith. Let's go back to 1964. Your sophomore year. The night before, you are going to be part of a group integrating Southwest High School. What were your thoughts the night before? This is 1964.
Let me preface my comments by saying, my response by saying that some of what I say might be offensive to people. It's not intentional. It's just truth. My sister, my late sister, Reba Jackson, also was one of the seven. She and I were among the seven students who integrated Southwest High School. And by that time, Southwest Atlanta was fast becoming what was considered the Mecca and the ideal neighborhood. My neighborhood had been there before the white neighborhood existed. So we were not part of that Mecca era. We had been there. And I had been attending Turner High School, wonderful high school, but the year I entered 8th grade, it was overcrowded. 8th and 9th grade, we went on double sessions to accommodate all the students. And I believe I was at school from, I think, 8 till 12, I believe, in 9th and 10th grade. I don't recall the hours. I just remember the classes being so crowded. And as I heard someone talking about getting books that were already had names in it, but some classes we didn't get books because there simply weren't enough to go around. So you don't give them to a few, you just don't give them out. And I had gotten to a point where really I did not like school. I had always loved school, but I loved my teachers that I had. I loved the classes that weren't crowded, but in the classes that were crowded, I was finding myself really kind of becoming somewhat disconnected. It was too much to deal with. And I can even remember the home economics student, some of the students sharing a seat because there weren't enough chair stools to go around at the sewing machines, so they're sharing a stool. And I knew that my father had been one of 9 parents here in Atlanta who had actually persevered against the Atlanta Board of Education in 1956, I think it was, to get them to comply with the Brown decision. So actually, you could say my family had come up through that hell because whites started coming by, especially on Friday nights, throwing rocks through our window. We were sort of like sitting pigeons, I guess you would say, in a sense, because our street, Herring Road, Wortham Avenue in Philadelphia, were the only streets in what looked like had been a white area, but it started out as a Black neighborhood. There's a long history behind what happened, so I won't go into all of that, but just to say had prevented them as much from building into a full community. Now, coming up to this, I was ready to go somewhere. And so when I overheard my father talking about the school and the whole thing of it, schools now having to integrate, because like I say, they persevered for several years to get that to happen. Because I think sometimes that people sort of almost go into the thing of like, oh, we integrated the schools. That didn't happen magically or overnight. There were your parents, your adults who had to spearhead and go through hell to get them to even come to that. In Topeka, then in Atlanta, and I'm sure in several other areas. But the night before, my father called my sister and I into his bedroom, and he said, first of all, this is something that I would never ask you all to do. I want you to remember that and to be sure that you're clear as what you want to do. And I was saying yes, because the other thing I failed to mention, to go to Turner High, I had to get up, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning, catch a bus to go down to either catch, I think we call it the 60s, whatever, Lyndhurst, to get downtown and then catch a bus there and then transfer to another one and walk about a block or so to get to Turner High. As a teenager, I was not a morning person. So 5 o'clock was just disruptive to everything. But my father called us in there and he said, there are 2 things I want to tell you. He said, first thing, he said, white folks are dumb. He said, don't you ever forget that. And that was interesting because I thought about the fact later that I had never heard of my parents speak of white people as being smart anyway. Even as kids, we were taught to address them, to respond yes and no, and not never yes ma'am or no ma'am, or yes sir or no sir, but yes and no. And the other thing he said is, don't you ever let a white boy cross my threshold. So you asked the night before, that was it.
You just had two things to say.
Two things to say.
Harold Scott, 1969. What was the climate like in your neighborhood in terms of people being excited? I guess that's the word you use in terms of this thing was finally going to happen, this integration, and then what were you doing?
In 1969, I was living in southeast Georgia, Swainsboro, Emmanuel County. Now, prior to '69, in that area, we had what we call the Freedom of Choice Plan, which started in 1966. With the Freedom of Choice plans, students could go to any school in that area that they chose to, either school, be it a black school or the white school. So we had a few students from the black school that went to the white school. Nothing from the white school came to the black school. So there was a little bit of an indoctrination of what was to come. In 1969, our full integration started in Emmanuel County. School didn't start on the day that it was scheduled. There were lawsuits going through. We don't want our white students and going to school with our black students. I was 10 years old. So as a 10-year-old student, a 10-year-old child, it wasn't that big of a deal to me. I've seen the things on TV with Dr. King and the civil rights movement and all those things. And it wasn't that big of a deal because the school that I would go to was in my neighborhood. I can throw a rock to the school from my house. In that neighborhood were several teachers who were also friends of our family, members of our church. The church was big during those days. So I didn't feel any uneasiness. I felt comfortable because that school was right here in the neighborhood. So as a 10-year-old in elementary school, it wasn't so much of a change of pace as to this is something that's different. Now, across town during the high school, at the high school with the teenagers, there was a whole different story going on over there. A whole nother story going on over there. The very first week of school, there was an incident that happened, and parents from came to the middle school, which we were at the time, middle school, elementary school, we wasn't called middle school then, to get their students out of that school when there was an incident far on the other side of town. That was the uneasiness that some parents had. And of course, these were white parents. These were not black parents, because the black parents were, everything's gonna be okay. So there wasn't an uneasiness per se, and it was because of the comfort level that I had with the school that was in my neighborhood and the people that I knew that were there to protect me.
Reverend Mathis, that first day that you were going to be part of this integration that was finally taking place. By the way, y'all should know that Georgia was very slow, like a lot of other states. I do mean slow in complying. I'm going to have more about that in just a moment. But Reverend Mathis, what's your story about that first day?
Well, I had been in primary school, middle school, all black school. As I got to 9th grade, getting ready to go into the 10th grade, integration, full integration hit. And I was able to get 1 year into at Monroe High School, which is the only black school in the city of Albany and Dougherty County. And we attended it for that year. And the next year was a culture shock. We were forced, and I lived in the East, and the school that I was forced to attend was in the East. It was a Doherty High School, a school that was built for white students. And we, that, you know, that end of that school year and the beginning of the next one, we began to talk to our friends at the black school and talk about how we're gonna now be separate. When we wanted to be there, we wanted to be at the black school. We wanted to sing Old Monroe High. And not I'm proud to be a Trojan. We wanted to sing that, but it was not to be. And we got there, and let me tell you, I was not one of those ones, even though I could run, I could catch a football, I could dribble a basketball, but when I got there, I wasn't going to do any of that because I said, I'm not letting these crackers use me to do nothing. And I mean, that's what I said. And I didn't do it. I became really militant because of what I was hearing, the undertones of these white kids. You know, so it made me more militant. Well, some of my colleagues, my classmates, they assimilated right on in, and the man used them on the football field, and after that, he used them up, they were gone. But I stayed focused on the cultural aspects of that piece. And we would catch these white boys in the bathroom, knowing what they had said to them and about us, and we would flip the lights out. And you had to come through the door to get out. So it was from one perspective, it was really, really bad. But it was a teachable moment too. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It was the best of time because now I get a chance to gradually assimilate with people of European descent. And it was the worst of time because I had to leave a school where the teachers showed compassion to me. The teacher was concerned whether or not I got an education. The teachers were concerned and said that you're gonna get this lesson, boy. But when I got there, we didn't have that. And I think shortly thereafter, they passed this law where you can't discipline anymore. You know, and that came about, and that was a terrible thing. So it was a really a frightening moment, knowing after we had left Monroe that year, the next year we were going to be integrated, and we were going into a whole different setting. The administrators were all white. The teachers were basically all white, and they didn't show any love for me. I could see it then, but I see it more so now as I reflect back. They was not there to give me the same opportunity as those other Europeans were getting. It was only because the law said that I had to go that I went.
I'm also joined by Cathy Loving, who's the former archivist for the Atlanta Public Schools and also assistant to an incredible person. And Cathy, first of all, these stories that you hear are not lost on you. I know that.
I know they're not.
And also your time with the beloved Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, champion for education, champion for Black folks, champion, period. What conversations did you have with him about integration in education?
Dr. May's philosophy was that we didn't need to desegregate the schools. He felt that the Black students, the Negro students, should have had in their neighborhoods where they could walk to the same quality of books, They had the quality of teachers. Let me say that right now. Back in the day, like he said, he could walk to school, and Miss Annie, was your auntie, even though she wasn't blood relation to you, you did something wrong, your mama knew about it before you got home. We got liquidated when they desegregated the public schools. When I say we got liquidated, we took the core foundation away from the Black families. Black teachers had degrees when they were not mandated to be degreed. Most of the white teachers went to normal training school and learned to add 1 and 1 and Tom, Dick, and Harry. You know what I'm talking about, C. Ann run, C. Dick run. It wasn't mandated that you had to have a degree. Vaseline Estelle Usher, who started the Girl Scout organization for colored girls, had her master's degree from the University of Chicago, just like Benjamin Mays, just like Mary McLeod Bethune. When you didn't have to have a degree back then. So here you had degree teachers teaching the Black children, or the Negro children, let's just be historically correct, teaching the Negro children and teaching from the hip, as the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education showed. Even Glenda Hatchett, Judge Hatchett, she talked about how, and her mother was the teacher, talked about how they got the books, that half the chapters were missing, the cover was gone. Vaseline Usher used to collect a little stipend from the kids, and they would buy the paper bags, and they would write on the outside of the paper bag what the book was. A teacher could teach from the hip because they had the knowledge, they knew. When they desegregated and integrated, and integration means that they intermingle and exchange the culture, the ethnicity, the learning, it didn't happen. They had a lottery system set up, and Dr. Mays was opposed to this also. Meantime, he's working on getting Dr. Krim in 1972, the first African-American superintendent. And also, Atlanta Public Schools put Rufus Clement, the first Negro, on the Atlanta Public School Board in place, hoping to stay. We desegregated. It didn't work. As you know, you said it took a long time, but it didn't work. Even though Rufus Clement was the former president of Atlanta University. So they had an intelligent Negro that they said, see, we did what you told us to do. But that didn't happen because of Calhoun versus Latimer and many other court cases. But Dr. Mays was totally opposed to it. He said it wasn't necessary. Our Negro children had to get on a bus and ride 2 hours to get to the white school they were desegregating, go to school, come home hungry, riding 2 hours back on the bus. The white kids are walking right into their school, right into their classrooms, right out the classrooms, going home and having a field day. These kids were worn out and tired. So no, he was totally against it.
For our audience who may not know, Cathy, give the exact date that technically Atlanta Public Schools did integrate. Now, Brown versus Board was 1954, right?
1961, the Atlanta 9 desegregated the Atlanta Public Schools. And by the way, President John F. Kennedy said, every state in the contiguous South and over the United States should be as peaceful and as honorable as we were when we desegregated. Of course, that was 9 students. That was only 1 year. They were going to desegregate 1 year at a time. So they did 1 grade level. And that's not post haste. And just when they won, when they turned over Plessy versus Ferguson with Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall said, fools, we have just begun. The fight has just begun. There's much to do. And meantime, Eisenhower was sitting there going, I did the most damn fool thing I did, putting Earl Warren on the Supreme Court. He said that was the worst thing he did, put Boodle on the Georgia District Court. He said that was a big mistake, but he had to live with that.
Phyllis Jackson Smith, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I was reading that, by the way, if y'all haven't read a wonderful piece by Ty Sagami in the AJC, you really ought to. I really think it's award-winning. I read that 4 times and I cried. There's an experience in the cafeteria, and if you're comfortable sharing that, could you talk about those days in the cafeteria?
I am. And I would say that even years and hours of therapy have not erased the pain and the tears. So if you see tears, just bear with me. Because to be honest, I talked about one, but there were so many days. My entire 10th grade year, I was the only Black 10th grader. The other 6 Blacks had at least the privilege of having the same lunch hour, same lunch period. The school, I know that at least somewhere between 600 and 800 white students had transferred from Southwest High when they learned that it was going to be integrated, that fall. But I was the only Black 10th grader. First and foremost, every day of my 10th grade year, students in my classrooms called me Nigger Phyllis. First of all, they didn't have to say my name at all, and it definitely wasn't Nigger Phyllis. So, but that was what they would come in the room yelling, Nigger Phyllis and what have you. When we went to the cafeteria for lunch, we went through this breezeway, and I have to just digress a moment and say, I was mystified. I had never ever heard of or knew that students were allowed to smoke at school. And so these students were smoking on campus in the breezeway. I had never seen anything like that. But whatever they were eating, they would throw at me and on me. So of course, for me, it became like, I probably could have competed with Noah Lyles, trying to come from my class to go across that breezeway without getting splattered with whatever they were eating. But once I got in the cafeteria, if I sat down, chairs would fly in every direction. I reached a point because it does impact on you. You're a teenager, you have feelings too. And I reached a point where I would look for the most crowded group of students and go toward that table, knowing that everybody was going to knock over their seats getting up so that they would not be seated with me and I would be at a table by myself. Getting in line, some of them would throw their food, at me, on me. And I remember one time in particular, and I don't know if this is the one I talked about with Ty or not, but I was in the cafeteria. They had thrown, and I'd also learned, even if it was hot, I would put a sweater on my shoulders sometimes, because you don't know what somebody's going to throw. And you got milk and stuff, but you can take the sweater off. But I was standing there and I knew I had milk because I had gotten that off of me in my sweater. And, they had soup and somebody was, flicking some soup. And I remember all of a sudden, I felt like somebody was staring at me, the cafeteria staff. And I had always seen all white cafeteria staff, had not noticed these 2 Black females there. And they were looking at me. Their look, it was a penetrating glance, and I thought they were angry with me at first because my sister and I had experienced that in another situation where we got on a bus and some Black, I think they were people who were housekeepers, who were maids in the homes out in that area. And when we got on the bus and sat up front, they had said, they need to come back here where they belong, that sort of thing. So I didn't know if that was the reaction I was getting from these ladies. And then when I looked closer, I could see that one had her hand on her hip. And she was staring at me. And if I had interpreted the glance, it would have said, baby, you stand firm. Stand. And to be perfectly honest, that was what kept me going that day, even to stand in that line. Most of the time, I wouldn't even buy a full meal. I might just get a snack and eat it or what have you. But that typified, to be perfectly honest, my entire first year. The thing that bothered me, I think even back then more than then, I don't know if I dwelled on it a lot, but the teachers didn't intervene to say, this is wrong. I did have one teacher, and I think she was a math teacher, but she told the students, do not move a chair out of order in this room. You cannot do that. You cannot move a single chair out of order. Although she was the same teacher who asked if my sister and I had the same mother and father. She said because my sister was so much smarter in math, and she was. She was practically a genius. She was a genius. But she's going to question whether we had the same parents. Mhm.
Now is a man on the clock, militant man on the clock, which is still raw, which I love, by the way. We hear Phyllis tell that story. And someone would say, well, if we had known that our kids were going to go through all of that trauma, because that's what it was, perhaps maybe we should have had a different approach to integration. Or do you feel like you all were those warriors that you had to be on the front lines of that battle?
Let me first of all say that trauma is nothing new to us. We were traumatized when Europeans started the European exploration and then started exchanging, rather than commodities in Africa, for humans. They would bring us through the Middle Passage to the Caribbean, where they would season us. And they would take a black man and stretch him and tie him to a horse facing that way and a horse facing that way and set him apart and hit the horses and pull them apart in front of all of us. So we've been traumatized ever since we've set foot in this country. So as we fast forward, I appreciate what the sister said about being traumatized. But we had to stand the test of time. I don't know, if, probably none of you, but I'm a descendant of Mama Dolly, a.k.a. Annie Raines, a.k.a. Mama Dolly. You can research it. She's in the books. She was a leader in the civil rights movement when Charles Sherrod and some of the white freedom workers came to Southwest Georgia to do mass voter registration. My great-grandmother, because she didn't work for the man, she wasn't afraid of the man. She was a midwife. And she took those freedom riders onto our farm in Lee County, Georgia. And she said to the clans that if you come on my land and I don't get you off, you ought to stay. She said, but let me tell you this. I brought a men of you in this world, and I'll take a men of you out of this world. Now that's in the book. Charles Sherrod, if y'all know, about it, that's so, and he states that in the history book. So I've experienced trauma even as a young boy. Well, my mother, who worked for this white family, and they had a florist and kept a lot of money around the house, but they had kids, and one of them was a drunkard. The daughter was an alcoholic. So one day, this daughter hit a kid, and rather than calling the police during that period, and this was in the 60s, rather than calling the police, she came home and got some of the money and took the money back and paid. So when the parents found money was gone, who did they? Annie Pearl, you got my money. You got the money. I've never taken anything from y'all. I've only given you all I had. And my mama didn't come home that night. So I asked my grandmother, who lived next door, said, me, mama, where's mama? She said, well, she gonna be all right. I said, well, where's mama? I want mama. And she said, your mama in jail. And she stayed in jail a couple of days before they finally let her out. So trauma, I've been accustomed to. So as we moved and matriculated through life and got to where we were going to integrate schools, I kind of knew what we were up against because I had known what had happened to my mama and what had happened with my grandmother. And she was that my great grandmother was able to stand because we had a little money. You know, she bought all of her children land. And back then, if you were fighting the system, they said, okay, if you get involved with that, the movement of segregation, we're gonna fire you. So people were scared. They was afraid to lose what they had. Or you didn't borrow money, but we'll call the note due. And that frightened a lot of black folks. So they were traumatized too. But my great grandmama, Mama Dolly, and that's my DNA, and I stand on that story.
That first year for you, and you said, you knew a lot of the kids because you all were coming in together. So that first year, when you reflect on it, how was it?
The first year at the, I was in the 5th grade at the time. So 10-year-old 5th grader, you don't, first thing you want to do is just do your lesson, go outside and play. So it wasn't that big of a transition when the white students came over to our school. And to give a little background on that, when Brown versus Board of Education passed, what some of the schools, counties started doing was building what they call equalization schools. Now, separate but equal had been ruled unconstitutional, but they was building these new schools in those areas, thinking that, okay, so black people, you have a nice new school over here, you don't want to integrate. So that's what had happened to the school that was in my neighborhood. 1955, this brand new school was built. It was a large school, and it was built right there in the neighborhood where we lived. I mean, like I say, it was less than 2 minutes. Everybody could walk to the school. It was in what we call the Gumlog area, project area. And so most of the black students who lived in that area could walk to school. So that the transition at the school itself, having black students and white students in our school, it was different, but it wasn't, I won't say there wasn't a lot of anger and hostilities at that age for us, but you could tell that the teachers were different. The adults were different. Having had those, like you said, the teachers in the black schools who, you're gonna do this work, whether you like it or not, because you have to have this to succeed out there. So they cared about you getting your work because you had to have it to be successful. They catered to each student. One of my teachers who happened to be my Sunday school teacher, my cousin, and my 3rd grade teacher at the same time, so Miss Doyle, we called her Miss Doyle, but because in school you had to call her Miss Doyle. But she always said, Harold, you're very smart. And she made sure that I knew that I had the ability to do the work. But it wasn't just with me, it was with everyone. So we felt comfortable when they were around, knowing that we was gonna be protected and we were gonna be schooled and we were gonna be engaged. So them being at school made us feel a little better. The white students, we go outside and play, so no big deal. They played games that they played over at their schools. No, we don't do that over here. We play softball. So we played softball. They played, we played kickball, So we played, and by playing, that helped us, I think, ease some of the frustration, because it wasn't the kids. It's never the kids. It's always the adults. So that transition wasn't as difficult as for a 10-year-old.
Cathy, when did we start to see more of a, if you want to call it, diverse in terms of educators with APS?
Well, let's talk about the lottery system.
Yeah, let's talk about
We're not talking about the lottery where you buy the tickets now. We're talking about the lottery system where they had the white teachers go to the black schools and they had the black teachers go to the white schools. But the black teachers they pulled from the black schools had masters, specialist degrees, PhDs. They put them over in the white schools. They sent some of the teachers that barely had no degree or had just a little training, could have been in a teacher's aide, and they would sit up in the classroom and file their fingernails. And I got this from teachers that actually were there during the time, as well as Benjamin E. Mays. They would sit up and file their fingernails or comb their hair, and you heard the word Negro. Well, that was the nice way of saying Negro according to them. But Dr. Mays always said, don't they understand that 2 syllables, knee and grow. The knee and grow. 2 syllables, educated people couldn't use it. And so I had to teach somebody that when I got to Georgia in '79, that we were not Negroes. We were Negroes, or we were Black, or we were African American, but we were not Negroes. So back to them sitting there filing their fingernails or combing their hair, and like you said, and you said, and you knew, they weren't interested in teaching you. Now, Vaseline Estelle Usher, she died at 104 at the Sage E. Mays Nursing Home. She had a Tuskegee Airman, Lou Johnson. And Lou was at David T. Howard. And Lou would sit up and he'd bang on his desk with his pencil when they were playing drums out with the band. And she said, boy, you Black, you got to study harder, do more than everybody else. That's the only way you're going to make it. Well, he became an engineer. His children became engineers. But he credited that to Miss Usher, making him get his lessons. And that's when I said that the system we were liquidated. Because when they took the best Black teachers, the best and the brightest, and oh, by the way, you know that teaching scandal that happened? See, this is a circuitous thing, how things go around. The Black teachers learned how to cheat on the test when they went to the white schools. They had been cheating on the test for years. And that's where they learned it. Oh, this is what you do. You teach the test ahead of time. That's why these kids are doing so great. Even though the Black kids were just as intelligent, they learned just as much. Louis Sullivan, Secretary of Health and Education, under President Bush, started Morehouse Medical School. We had Pulitzer Prize win. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was not a good student. I have to just tell you that, not till he got to Morehouse. But Vaseline was his teacher and his Sunday school teacher. And she told DeMarc, you know, that ruler came out and you had to learn your lesson. You had to do your work. That changed when they put a lot of the white teachers who didn't think that Negroes could learn and was short of coming out the trees with the tail. They had just lost their tails, but they couldn't learn. Now, if I could go back a little bit before that, it galled the white community to know that Negroes were going to be getting a free education. See, the first free public schools were for children of freed slaves in Atlanta, Georgia. The first free public schools, 1866. Atlanta Public Schools didn't start until 1872. And the resolution was placed by an ordained Catholic priest, Dr. Daniel O'Keefe, who became a good Georgia Baptist, got married and had kids, and couldn't get free education for him. So he put a resolution out to start the school system. The first president of the school board was also from Ireland and a Catholic, just to show you that religious thing coming back into the school system. But I just wanted to share that information.
That's why I'm loving. With Ty, I do want to offer each panelist here to take a moment and reflect on how far we've come, or perhaps the challenges that still exist, or how optimistic you are, or whatever you want to say. This is the moment to reflect upon that. Cathy, I'll start with you.
I'm not optimistic at all. Project 2025, we have, as I said, history is circuitous. If you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. All this woke stuff. We are right back where we started from. Governor Kemp has promised $6,500. That sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? For AKA scholarship money, or AKA a voucher, so you could go from a low-performing school to a high-performing school. Parents used to ask me, what's the best school to go to? I said, the best school for your child to be in is the school that you're active in. You have to be there and be an active participant, and then your school is going to be on top. But I have to ask you, what is $6,500 going to do at a private school? How are you going to get there? The other thing is you have to be a resident of Georgia for a year, or you can be exempt if you're in the military. The other thing is you can use the money for tutoring, or you can use it to homeschool. How many people in this room are capable of homeschooling their children? I know a couple there. Don't raise your hand. I know one, and her children are very, very intelligent. I've met them personally. But the point is, they're very few. Now they said they have enough money to give out 21,000 scholarships. Oh, by the way, they haven't come up with the list of low-performing schools yet either. Now I have to ask you, if you got 21,000 scholarships and the Georgia student population is 1.6 million, how far is that money going? We right back where we started in 61 when they were giving out vouchers for students to go to college because you couldn't get in Georgia State. They had to sue to get in Georgia State. And then by the time they won the suit, they told them, well, you're too old now, you got to go to another school. We right back where we started from. That voucher money is a drop in the bucket. It's a pittance. And then if you transfer your child to the higher performing school, how are they going to get there? What about the uniforms? What about the extensively high programs that are going to be taking place? The travel. That's nothing. All they're doing is what, with the charter schools, they're depleting the public school system. Project 2025, it wants to get rid of free public education. And who is it going to hurt? Raise your hands. Who is it going to hurt? Who is free public education going to hurt? It's going to hurt us.
Thank you. Reverend Mathis.
Well, as I look back, coming through elementary school, I had a principal who dumpster dived to get books. He went to the white school. He went to the white school to get books because we didn't have books. He would get into the dumpsters and get the books that the white school was throwing away. And he would bring them back. You talked about the brown paper bag, the newspaper. We made book covers because we couldn't put our names in the book. And we put, today they're doing mathematics, we did arithmetic, social studies, science, reading, English. And we put that on the book and we signed our name. So I moved on from seeing a principal who showed compassion, who wanted us to learn. He knew the barriers that beset us. He knew what we would face if we didn't get that basic foundation. And he did what he needed to do to get us that basic foundation so that we could build on that and move forward. Got to middle school, had teachers who was compassionate. I was playing in the drum and the band, then drummer, percussionist. I loved what I was doing because I had people that cared for me. They showed love to me. And if I got out of line, you're right. By the time I got home, the word was already there. So I knew what I needed to do. Just going on prepare for it. And then we got to high school. That was one of the issues that the preachers had with Martin. Martin wanted to go full scale integration. And some in the North said, no, let's gradually go into that. We don't need to go full scale because when we went full scale in Albany, Daughter County, Dr. Holly, according to my grandmother, who lived down the street from her, Dr. Holly and those men back in that day had a private club for the elite blacks. I mean, we had black businesses, and the men were running those businesses. Some of them didn't have but about a 7th or 8th grade education, but they had service stations. They had hotels and motels. They had restaurants. We were producing services to our people. But today we're consumers. We're consumers today. Integration didn't serve us well. And today we're more segregated today than we were. In my schools in Doherty County, they're probably 88.9% African American. And we got white kids in the community, in the population, but where are they? Home, schooling, charter school, private school. $6,500, you're right. Yeah, it'll get me in the door. If I lower the standards. If I lower the standards, you can come in the door. But if I don't lower the standards, that $6,500 won't get you in there. And what are you going to do once you get there? How are they going to continue to finance your education? So that's going to impact the public schools. And who's in the public schools? Let's face it.
It's scheduled for 10 years.
Yeah, let's face it. So what I think we have to do, we have to bring the village concept. The village people, we have to bring the village back.
That's right.
I said to my board of education on Monday night, we got to have the county school board. We got to have the county government. We have to have the city government. And you want to know a secret? All three of those governments are predominantly black. Predominantly black. So then we got to have the Chamber of Commerce who represent the business community. They're the ones making all the money off the school systems and making money off of us. If you're getting your extermination and so forth and so on, they're making the money. So we got to bring these people to the table. And we have to talk. Because, like it was the judge said, you know, you go on the laptops now, the world is, you know, but you got to have Wi-Fi. I know kids leave home and go to the park and try to get connected to Wi-Fi. I'm a proponent of the old-fashioned way, the books. I want the school books, because if I got the books, when I go from elementary to middle to high school to college, if I got my books, that's the beginning of my library. But if I got laptops, when I finish, I can't put that in my library because that data changes so much. And we can still be worldly with the textbook. We can still be worldly. I tell my students as I close, I'm an adjunct professor at the university at home and in the Department of Arts and Sciences. I teach American government, African American politics, and the diaspora. And I tell them, they say, well, I'm a quarterback on the team. I'm a baseball player. I'm a basketball player. No, you're a student. You're a student athlete. Now, when you finish here, you're going to be competing with Morehouse, Marshburn, Spelman, Bethune-Cookman, Tuskegee, Savannah State, Fort Valley. You're going to be competing with people around the world. So if you don't get that world view, as opposed to, see, with this view here, I can only see right there. But with this view, I see everybody in the room. You got to have a world view. And we got to move toward that. Some say, well, the people, the parents are younger today. They were younger when I was coming up. They were having babies at 15 and 16 then. That's where it was different then. We had the extended family. Well, you might not have a grandmama, a big mama, or a big daddy, but we can still bring the village back together. And that's what we got to do.
If I can just reflect back over my time doing integration, my story would be not so much about me, but those people, those teachers that came before me who really had to sacrifice. Last week, we're talking Brown versus Board of Education on a larger level, and I'll just break it down to in my town that I grew up in. We just lost a teacher. She was 94 years old last week. She was a teacher at the Emmanuel County Elementary and High School Rattlers. These names may not mean anything to you guys, but some people down South Georgia who are listening, they would know exactly what it means. And she was a teacher at that school. A couple of months ago, we lost a principal, coach, teacher, County Commissioner Dessa Davis, who was a teacher, coach at the elementary school of the black school, then transferred over to the high school. Names like that, Miss Bessie Doyle, Miss Catherine Boston, Mr. D.D. Boston, you know, so all of these names resonate, and they are a reflection of who I am sitting up here telling their story, not my story, the sacrifices that they made for me to be here. And I'm appreciative of them. And that's a history that we can't forget, Brown versus Board of Education, or their history. Many of the younger people in that town have no idea about those people. But they will, because I will keep their legacy going as long as I'm here. And I hope we can keep Brown versus Board of Education legacy going, that we never forget where we came from, and we can improve and we can get better. And although there may have been some mistakes, how do we learn and improve on those mistakes going forward? That should be our driving force. Learn from the past, bring it into the present, and improve the future.
Yes, as I reflect, I think, Rose, one of the first things I'm going to say is that I am so proud of being the daughter of Leonard Jackson. He's my hero. That's my father, my late father. He will forever be my hero. I know that it took a lot of courage for him and those other 8 parents to sue the Board of Education, because it would take, I could spend all evening just detailing to you all the hell that we went through, and I still would not finish telling that story. I think that integration was necessary. I started school in a 2-room schoolhouse in Cascade Heights. It was wholly inadequate. We even had a pot-bellied stove. And after my father could not get them to do the things necessary to bring it up to par, he said, we'll integrate. Beecher Hill School is near. Cascade Elementary is even closer. Venetian Hills is not that far. Several other elementary schools around. We'll integrate. And believe me, it was to say it was an uphill journey is such an understatement. But I do feel it was necessary, because even now, I will say, the schools now that seem like people say, well, now they're all segregated again. They are. But there is a measure of accountability that we as adults owe to our children. If they have books with 50 names in it before theirs is in it, is the book outdated? And who should carry forth that fight to say, get them new books? I remember going to my son's school, my son and daughter both were there, but to volunteer and going into his science classroom, because I told the teacher I was coming to help her, that she needed to volunteer. She said, yes. I go in there and say, out of 12 sinks, half of them are not functioning. And as I kept going, I said, wait a minute. And I said, did you know that these sinks don't work? She says, oh no, most of them don't work. And I said, then how are they supposed to do what they're coming here for? How are they supposed to learn? And she said, Gary, you'll find that going on in a lot of, and I said, that's not acceptable. So where's the accountability there? Because even then, what I was asking her was, what have you done to try to change this? And then look at what I'm supposed to do as a parent to try to change it. Because if a student is walking into that situation, they tend to accept that as the norm. This is how I have to learn. Children, I'm gonna say as a child, when Brown versus Board of Education, when other situations where you saw children entering school, integrating schools, of course, we had to become the foot soldiers. But the parents did the groundwork in terms of laying that and putting that forth. I think racism has existed since before the time of God. And racism is going to continue to exist. As someone said earlier, while you might enact legislation to say this is what's going to happen, you cannot legislate what's in a person's heart. And that's what you encounter on a day-to-day basis. But I'm willing to fight. I told my daughter, she laughs about this because I said, when I die, Maya, I want to be cremated. And she said, well, Mama, what about a viewing? I said, I don't want to put you through that hard effort. She said, what? I say, of getting my fists out the air. I said, because I know I'm going to be lying there like this, and I don't know if she would be able to put my fist down. So yes, I would just say basically, there is always going to be a need to speak up, to fight. Know that you're doing it for your children. Know that you're doing it for a better society and for a true cause. But fight.
Phyllis, Harold, Reverend Mathis, Cathy, thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Washington right now.
It's working. Okay. Whew, Miss Phyllis. Fist in the air, fist in the air. I just want to thank you all for your candor. I want to thank you for your honesty. I want to thank you for being here. This has been enriching to bring history to life, and a history that is very relevant to the times that we are in. Before I turn it over to Ty Tagami, who's going to facilitate our Q&A, I just want to ask our co-sponsors of this event, WABE, the Intersectionality Collective from the Mellon Foundation, the very last Africana Studies Department in the University System of Georgia, the Center for Civil and Social Justice for Emory Law School, and the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora. If any of us are still here as co-sponsors, please stand. I just want to thank you for supporting this event. I want to thank you. The Southern Center for Human Rights. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being a partner in the work that we are doing to advance justice on so many fronts. And Ty, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So my name's Ty Tagami. I'm a newspaper reporter, and I was so grateful to find these folks. My editor, and honored, by the way, that you shared your stories with me. They were among probably about a dozen people that I found. My editor asked me, like a few months before May, the anniversary, to find a way to tell a story about Brown v. Board of Ed. It's like, oh, well, that'll be easy, right? It was such a massive decision. If you tour this museum, you get the sense that, it was the spark that lit a fire that changed not just schools, but everything in this country. And so it's very difficult to wrap your arms around what it all meant. And so, the best way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time, I figured, let's just find the stories of some of these folks who lived through it. And what I discovered is everybody's story was very different, and they all had very different perspectives. So Miss Jackson Smith, you volunteered to go into a school, right? And Reverend Mathis and Mr. Scott, I don't think you really had a choice, right? Integration just happened to you. And so that affected the way you viewed the experience and the legacy. And so I could ask questions, but I think this is a moment for you guys. If you had any questions about their stories or about their interpretation of what it all meant, the legacy, now's the time to ask. Yes.
Is this on? Okay. I just want to say thank you all for, sharing your stories, first of all. Being raised by a grandparent who was much older than all of you, who simply didn't go to school because not only was there not really school, but no books and nothing for that to happen, and had to go work in the fields. You know, that was a different experience. But I'm prefacing my question really quickly. Something I wonder about, because as I listen to all of you, some of the stories you share, except for Miss Phyllis, that story was one in its own, and not necessarily a part of what I'm about to say. But listening to so much of what all of you had to say, for the most part, I'm thinking back about 25 years ago when I was in school, and thinking how some things don't change. Some things don't change, especially when you're talking about taking children from predominantly Black schools and putting them into predominantly white schools. But, you know, something I think that has been said by this panel, and I think is very important, is that history is going to repeat itself if we're not cognizant of what that history is. And so my question for you all is, in terms of doing this work, and I'm one of the 15 that's here to study Project 2025 and do that work from the legal side of things, how can people carry your legacies forward, right? How do we carry those legacies of our ancestors, of the people who've gone through this, and how do we, I'm sorry, I'm not phrasing this very well, but how do we, I guess, bridge that gap and keep moving forward and keep telling those stories, because it's not just a history, it's something that's ongoing. And so any advice you have for, you know, carrying that legacy forward and sharing those stories and being part of that change, I would love to hear anything that you have to say about that. Thank you.
Because that's my job. My job is to share stories, be a storyteller. My job as a journalist is to be fair, not objective. Before y'all will start tweeting that Rose Scott says she's not objective journalist. I follow Gwen Eichel, that's my she-wrote. My job is to be fair. I'm going to be fair. And part of that means sharing stories, telling stories, sitting down, listening, giving a platform. I remember when I started at WABE 17 years ago. I was the first Black female reporter in the 2000s, I guess you could say, there. And a woman called and said, "Is that Rose Scott gonna be telling urban stories? Is she the urban reporter?" That's my job. I have to tell their stories. I have to give them a platform. That's how we keep it going. Because obviously now, some folks think that history should be taught a certain way or in a certain context, so we don't offend somebody. What about Miss Phyllis? What about the folks that offended her?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So miss me with all that. I'm with Miss Phyllis, fist in the air till the day I die.
My response to that is this. I opened up the first school museum of its kind in order to preserve the history, the Black, the white, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the bottom line and the top of the line is, so many people didn't even know that Atlanta public schools, that the children of free slaves had the first free public schools under the Freedmen's Bureau. They don't know that Henry McNeil Turner, we were talking about this today, was from the Mandingo tribe, and he was royal, and he came free, and that's why they named the school for him. They don't know that Benjamin E. Mays met with Gandhi in 1936 when Martin was a little tyke, and came back and taught him about nonviolent social change. That's what I did. I opened up the first school museum, and it's on its third leg now, and Miss Erica is now heading up the museum. But that history is there. It's notated. It's a permanent history. It's there for people to take tours, hopefully soon again. It's there for the children to learn. in the middle school children, which was basically at first an all-white school and then it integrated. In fact, one of the students, I have a stack of letters here that they wrote, and one of the students' sister actually was one of the first students to desegregate the Atlanta Public Schools. She went to Grady. The bottom line is these children wrote letters and thanked the Atlanta Nine. Charles Lincoln Harper, the first principal of Booker T. Washington High School, opened up Booker T. Washington University in 1923-24. And the reason I said university, every teacher had a master's or an undergraduate degree, and people were paying tuition to come to Booker T. Washington High School. People didn't know that. Those parts of history have to be told and retold and retold and retold. While we have Morehouse Medical School because of Benjamin E. Mays and because of Lewis Sullivan, who graduated from Washington High School and Morehouse College. There's so much. White Fowler, believe it or not. Johnny Isaacson were Atlanta Public School students. George Goodwin, the Pulitzer Prize winner. There's so much history, and instead of people wiping it out and banning books, then they'll be able to go and view it in the Atlanta Public School archives.
If I can just kind of add to that as well, is meeting the youth and people where they are. Rose platform, she's gonna continue to do what she do. The platform that she just mentioned, all other platforms, if they don't want to do it in the school, then we have to meet these kids where they are and let them know this. I have a youth sports program. Sports always bring in kids, but we talk about stuff other than sports. So we have to meet these youth, not only kids, but they are the main ones who need to know the history, who don't know it. So we just have to meet them where they are with this information.
How do we keep the story going? It's during the Atlantic slave trade, they brought over slaves after slave after slave, especially after Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin. And when the slaves got here, some of them were old slaves, some of them was new slaves. And one thing that the old slaves did was taught the young slaves, gave them the story to how to avoid the master's whip, how to avoid the master punishing them, and some of the things that they ought to do or ought not to do. So they told it to that generation. So when the old slaves went home to be with their fathers, the young slaves still continued to tell the story. So we have to tell the story. However different, however hard it is, we have to tell the story. We have to tell the story that it was Andrew Johnson that took the land back that was given to black folks from South Carolina down to Jacksonville, Florida. Now, some whites don't want to hear that. But we have to tell that story. They have to be willing to tell the story. Because as I look at it today, these young European kids, they are not tied to the land that their ancestors was tied to. When they die and they leave it to them, they want to sell it and get going. They don't want the land. So they don't value the land as much as their ancestors did. So we have to tell that story. You can't tell it by blocking what's being taught in the schools. History is what it is. It's history. Or her story. Yeah, okay. We'll give you her. Yeah.
Questions? I saw a hand up.
Good evening. I apologize. I have a little brain fog tonight, so I wrote my question down. My name is Tiffany Fick. I want to first just thank all of our ancestors and all of our elders who sacrificed so much for all of us to be in this room tonight. I also want to thank all of you for sharing your stories, and I want to thank you, Rose, as always, as centering education in the work that you do. It's incredibly important to me. I'm the daughter of an educator, and I actually just texted my mom while y'all were talking because I was like, Mom, when did you integrate high school again? Well, I actually said school, and she was like, oh, senior year, 1971. And I was like, oh, Lord, that was late. she grew up in Southwest Georgia, and she is a retired educator herself, just retired last year, moving back to Atlanta here soon. I'm a former APS teacher, and I consider solving these problems to be my life's work, and that is why I am here tonight. And I've experienced these inequities firsthand being in the classroom. I've experienced them doing work across the country, as well as working directly with the Board of Education in districts. And one of the things that I have learned through this work and is brought up in this conversation is that even within the Black community, we don't always agree on the solutions to the problem because we are not a monolith. For someone like myself, who's like very pragmatic and grounded in data, sometimes that can be frustrating because I want to build community and I want to be able to get to solutions. I think we're on the precipice of something. I don't know quite what it is and what it is going to be, but I feel that energy. And so I want to pull on some of your wisdom in the room right now. And what is something, if anything, you think or believe that the younger generation can do in this moment to not only build community, but also build power? One of the things that I have learned in organizing work is that the only way that we can make change is through building power in beyond ourselves and beyond our identities. And so I'm just curious, through your life's experiences, is there anything that you have to share to the youth that I could pass on?
You know, I been a man of the cloth. I wonder why Gen Z is not in the church. Okay, so I each of my classes I would ask them, but tell me, I need to know something that the other preachers don't know. So why aren't you in the church? One said, we don't go because we don't want to be judged. And we don't want to be looked upon about what we're wearing. And the book says, come as you are. If you're a drunker, come on in there drunk. We this is the gospel to straighten you out. If you don't have on suits, come on as you are. We'll straighten you. And then the other one said that the message that the preachers are preaching is not relevant to the kid today. And the third one said, we don't have Big Mama anymore to make us go to church. So I say to my students, look, I appreciate that. I got more knowledge now of why you aren't there than the rest of the preachers in town. So I got something on them. But let me just share this with you. The two most important institutions to any race of people, especially the African American, or the Negroes, was the family and the church. That's what brought our ancestors. The family and the church. And if it was good enough for them then, it's good enough for them now. Though we have grandmothers who are 38, 32, we can't just say, well, they don't know what they're doing. There again, we got to bring the village back into play. We have to bring it back into play. We have to see them for who they are, and we have to respect their views. I got grandkids, man. They don't see the way I see things. They see things totally different. But we talk about it, and we try and have a meeting of the minds. And I think that's what we got to do. We have to approach it from that perspective. We have to let them know their views and their ideas are just as important as mine. And we take those ideas and those views, and they can help us solve these problems. They can help us solve them. We just have to give them an opportunity.
To comment on that, and I guess my answer and solution to that is simple. I think that parents truly need to empower their children by speaking affirmations to them each day, telling them that they're great, tell them that they were born into greatness and that they cannot forget that. They have to achieve it, they have to maintain that. I remember when I first moved to Atlanta, went to Shrine of the Black Madonna and found these t-shirts for my children who were young then. And the t-shirt said, when God made the black child, he was showing off. And so I let them wear, that was part of the affirmation, but every day, and even when I speak to kids, I would tell them, they say, I'm having a hard time with language. You're having a hard time with language. Do you know what your ancestors did with language? Do you know when they came over on slave ships, you may have had 5 people next to each other from 5 different tribes, speaking 5 different languages, because Africa still has over 2,000 languages, more than any other culture in the world. I said, somehow coming to a country stripped of everything, language, culture, home, everything. They mastered enough to know how first to communicate with each other. I say, that is greatness. Nothing but greatness can do that. I say, they didn't know the math here, but they knew the stars. You learned to count by the stars. I say, you are great. And you came from greatness, and you have to keep it going. And really, I feel like we just have to keep instilling that in them. And I even used to tell my, you don't have an option. You're great. You don't have an option. Please manifest it. My late son challenged me on every end with that, but he turned out great. So.
Just one quick thing to add to that real quickly, to your question. And you kind of answered your own question in the beginning. You said we don't have all the answers and we don't have do it the right way. Something that you said to that effect, that we don't have all the answers and we don't do it the same way all the time. Rose added something to that as well, listening. And also with the Reverend here, he said, taking their input in. I think all 3 of those things are what we can do with the youth. Let them know that their opinion is valuable. And instead of us talking to them all the time, listen to them. And because I was one of those kids, I was real shy, I was real quiet. And so when I was younger, not that way now, but so you have to sometimes talk to the youth and get them to talking to you and let them know what's on their mind. You may find out there's something in them that has the answer to the problem that we're looking for.
At the Atlanta Public School Archives, I established a program for the youngest museum docents from any museum. They were kindergarten to 5th grade. In fact, one's name was Ferguson. And I wanted her to do her project on Plessy versus Ferguson. She said, well, why? I said, your name is Ferguson. Don't you think that's a good idea? I had a little boy who couldn't speak or couldn't hear, and he loved George Washington Carver. And he was shocked to learn that George Washington Carver's name was not always George Washington Carver, that he was Carver's boy. But the bottom line is these children defended their projects in front of the Archivist of the United States of America at the inauguration of the Southeastern Archives. They learned at an early age. They shared. They did their projects. They were so proud. And he was proud. He said, and I quote, that every school system in the United States should have a program like that. So what everybody is saying, you have to be the griots. You got to tell the story. You got to share the story, but you got to start here and come up to here. Because some people, you grew up with a color TV. These kids don't know what a black and white TV is. They don't know when 12 o'clock at night it went, and somebody's saying, God bless America. They don't have they have their own bedrooms. They have their own computers. They have their own iPads and tablets. They go to Google. Every home should have a paper dictionary. And if your child is reading and they need to learn how to read it, they don't know what a word is, break it up into syllables and make them, at the end of the week, whatever, every word they use, write a paragraph, tell a story about it. That's the way they're going to learn. That's the way they're going to remember the history. That's the way they're going to know that they are here because we were there. And that's the only way.
Don't you do it, Ty. I'm just going to sum all this up. And it's been a reoccurring theme tonight where our ancestor, Nikki Giovanni, who said, Black love equals black wealth. I love our kids. I'm done.
She wrote me a letter. I still have it.
So I want to say I spent hours interviewing these folks, and I still heard new stories tonight. I think we could go on a long time. And so if you were coming here to hear a little bit of, hoping to hear some passion and wisdom, I think we did. And I really want to thank you for traveling all this way and sharing your stories. We have run out of time. I'm going to introduce Professor Robin Walker-Sterling to close out the event.
Thanks, everybody. I will not take long because we are at 9:01, and so I'm already over time. But I just want to, I want to thank all of you so much, so much. I got to tell you, I am so full at this moment. My mind is full, and my heart is full, and my soul. My mind is full because I've learned so much information and information that I didn't know, that I honestly am desperate to know, that I wish there were vehicles that it was easier for me to know this information and for me to share it. And my heart is full because I am holding so many emotions, some of them conflicting at once, right? Like Miss Phyllis, do you know some of the names of the people who were throwing the food? Because I just want to talk to them. I just, you know what I mean? I won't do nothing. I just want to see something. But you know what I mean? So I'm holding feelings like that. And then, but I will tell you, the main place where I feel what we've heard tonight is in my hands, right? I'm a person of action. I'm a lawyer. I want to do things. I want to figure out what we do. I want to get into the playbook and rip it up. And so I just am so thankful for everyone, for your participation, for your bravery, for your incredible generosity of spirit. And I want you to know that I know we've talked about hopefulness as an orientation, or as whether or not people feel hopeful at this time. I'll tell you, all night I've been thinking of a quote from George Eliot, which I'm not going to get it exactly right, but George Eliot said, justice is like the kingdom of God. It exists not outside of us, but within us as a deep yearning. And more than anything, what I am taking from tonight is that we, all of us, every single one of us, we have a deep yearning for justice, for fairness, for opportunity to be equally